I've made further progress on scattering the different crystals, the Apexis crystals, in my Unreal 5 scene. I really want to propagate 3 crystals and reuse them in order to pull off the entire visual. And I'm thinking of creating this large twist, this large knot on the ground. I'm imagining this is some fantasy, some fantastical landscape that has been twisted in a slightly abstract way through magic, through mages, or through some unknown to Azeroth creatures, some geological events that we don't really know about. But first, like in the previous video, let me take you to the end, to you seeing the visuals in their current state. We saw this footage last time as well, but now the landscape in the background is more immense. Tower and the floating spires still lack WoW style textures, but their geometry has been refined. The colored spires now also have glowing VFX attached to them. Hello artists, my name is Pete. Before adding and scattering crystals in the scene, or editing the terrain again, I want to first give myself a better background, a better surrounding setting. This artwork is a diorama. As such, I'm not sure if I'm ready to make the land sit on water or anything as complicated. I want to pick up a simple color, a gradient between few colors perhaps. That will be my plane. On top sits volumetric fog. The fog gives further variety on color, lightness and hue. These crystals moving upwards on the facade of the Apexis Mage Tower, they will be just 3 different meshes. I'll reuse them by scaling them around and placing them in such a way that you can't really tell they're the same crystal, well, the same 3 crystals, repeated again and again and again. I'll have some variety in the texture work, so when I rotate the same one and I scale it up and down, it will give you the illusion that there are dozens of crystals instead of just 3. You can see here in Blender my selection of 3 crystals, and now here you can see me placing them and scattering them inside Unreal 5. Here I have my material setup where I'm creating a little placeholder with a green metallic hue in order to give me that metallic gem shine. I will replace this material later on for actual textured World of Warcraft style hand-painted visual, but for now this will do. After I scattered all of the gems inside of Unreal 5 and I had them at a stage where I was happy, it was time to take a step back and again revisit sculpting the landscape. In the first video, you saw me extensively sculpt the landscape, this little island inside of Blender. Well, this time around I want to have a more immediate look at what is going on. I want to remove this friction between me fixing up and sculpting in Blender and then having to import straight into Unreal. So instead, I just want to work in Unreal 5 itself. For that, I will try Vertex Sculpt mode and Dynasculpt. These are some of the modeling tools in the modeling tab of Unreal 5. I believe some of these are relatively new to Unreal 5. They sure didn't exist in Unreal 4 or perhaps even in earlier versions of Unreal 5. But you know, testing and experimenting can be very good. It can give you interesting results and unexpected, serendipitous, happy accidents. And I want to embrace that, so why not try it? Well, in here you see me do exactly that. I'm trying the Dynasculpt, but I'll be frank with you, it isn't really working out for me. There's something about the geometry, my geometry, that doesn't really fit very well with the Dynasculpt. I make brush strokes and I don't seem to have a particular strong effect, even though I have put them to be on a high strength. So after looking underneath my mesh, I can see that the geometry has folded on itself, which obviously is less than ideal. We don't really want any of that. So next I discard what I just did there. It wasn't successful after all, but I've learned a lesson, so no need to be sad. And next I try the Vertex Sculpt mode. This one works rather well for me, but even here I'm struggling a bit. I really wanted to change the landscape and sculpt it further, mainly for two concerns. The first one is that it looked relatively flat in my previous version. It wasn't really complementing the tower in any interesting way. The second one is that the scale for me seems off. It feels like I'm looking at an island from far, far away with its little peaks and valleys, and then an oversized giant tower sits on top. I don't really want scale that is off like that, and instead I want to go around and sculpt further peaks and mountains that are larger, maybe even as large as the tower. They complement the shape of the tower and they give everything a bit further interest. I did some of that in Unreal 5. I discarded some of the work that I did because it wasn't working, as I mentioned. I did get a tiny bit frustrated. So, after I've done all of the sculpting, I look at my version control and I'm thinking that I should really discard these changes that I just made because they didn't really work out. It's been an hour, and with me discarding these changes, it can easily feel like I frankly wasted an hour, like I haven't accomplished anything, like I failed. But I should not look at things this way. Yes, I didn't progress in the geometry itself, in the file itself, in the scene, but I learned valuable lessons. I learned what works and what doesn't. These few versions that you saw me do, two to be precise, they didn't work out. Well, what next? When I open and I try a third one, I'll carry on the lessons from these two, let's say, failures, or I'd rather call them sketches, and I'll actually know what to do with this third goal that I have. As such, this hour that I spent sculpting, it wasn't really wasted. I learned what to do, and better yet, I learned these two new tools, so I've expanded my horizons. So whenever you're creating your art, whatever it might be, in the moments when it feels frustrating or like things aren't visually moving forward, remember that you're still learning and carrying lessons forward. And these lessons are invaluable. They're good experience that will make your next go even better. Next up, I take a little break from editing this landscape that it feels like I am editing all the freaking time, and I go back to the flying spires of the tower. These are the spires that we've already mentioned represent the different specs of the mages in WoW. There is the middle one with pink color representing arcane power. There is a blue one that represents frost. Finally, there is an orange one that represents fire. By the way, that's my specialization. I've been playing a fire mage for over 15 years now. These were put next to one another in a very predictable way. It was creating the silhouette be a bit not so exciting. I wanted it to be more lively. I wanted more motion. I wanted it to be more dynamic. I wanted a stark silhouette. As such, I moved two of the flying spires into positions that are not nearly perfect and mirrored like they were before. This creates an uneasy feeling in the viewer and gives everything a bit more drama and interest, something that I really like. Next, I was in love with how the shapes, the silhouette of the lower parts of the spires looked. But only in his concept art that he did for me. He had bulkier, pointier, flowing, elegant, iron, spiky shapes. They were larger than the shapes that I have, and as such they were giving the spires a bit more weight, a bit more importance. It was drawing the eye towards them a bit better than my current version. As such, I really loved that. And it meant I'll go back to Blender and I'll refine that a little bit. I'll tweak it from my version into the version that Oli has. This little time lapse showcases me working and refining these shapes. At first, I was pulling around these metal golden faces that have two modifiers applied to them. One is solidify, in order to turn these simple planes, these simple squares, into an actual mesh with a bit of thickness to it. And the second was a subdivision to smooth it out and give it a bit of a better appearance. These here were my initial tries. I was getting a setup of the different faces, planes and modifier stack that I was starting to like. It was giving me power to be able to do what I want, yet it didn't really look nearly as perfect. It wasn't what I really wanted yet. You can see these where the shapes had these long legs like those of a spider. They were looking interesting, but not exactly what Only had, and that was leading me to think that is probably not what I'm after. I imported a version, and this progress to me looked like a hat of a jester. You know, the jester Darkmoon Faire transmog that you can get from the trading outpost? I'll put it somewhere up here on the screen. That jester hat with the little bells at the end. Well, this is what my tower silhouette reminded me of, and honestly, I wasn't really digging that. I was going in the right direction because everything was a bit more immense, giant and important now, but this jester look of a Darkmoon Faire, that wasn't it. So I went back in Blender and I refined a bit further. And I got to this stage that you see here. Much better, I thought, and much closer to what Oli had, with all the different spikes and the different motifs. If you've enjoyed this video, make sure to comment, like and subscribe. There will probably be more in this series in the Apexis Mage Tower, so stay tuned to see more on the development of the project. Thank you very much for watching. If you want better context as to what is going on in this video and how we got to the face that you're seeing on the screen right now, then make sure to check out the previous video. It will be up there or here, I'm not too sure. Somewhere on the screen there will be a little button to take you to the previous video. Check it out if you wish.